Welcome to Big Basket Now presents the RCB podcast.
There is no bigger spectacle in football than the Premier League. It is the dream of every football player taking his first kick. It's the emotion of billions of football fans across the globe. In the making of the Premier League, the biggest football brand on the globe, a handful of people's contributions lie at the very top. I have with me one of the most important members of the group, the man leading the revenue for the most coveted football league in the world, Will Brass, CCO of the Premier League. Welcome to the RCB podcast, Will.
Thank you for having me.
So nice to catch up with you. You just finished your session. How are you going? How's your visit to India been so far?
Well, so far it's been relatively brief. I think I landed about 4 or 5 hours ago. It's hard to keep track of time. But I mentioned in the session just now, one of the things that as an outsider, you always appreciate as soon as you set foot in India, really, is the level of dynamism and imagination that is all around you. And that's the case I always find when I visit this country, and it's certainly the case today.
One of the most valued football league in the world. Talk to me about how the journey has been, and you've seen it grow immensely over the years of your tenure.
Yeah, so I joined the league just under 8 years ago now, really as we moved away from a title partnership model, previously the Barclays Premier League. Barclays remain a very close partner of ours today, but moving away from that model and creating a new sort of clean brand. But the foundations for that success were put in place, a long time ago, really at inception in 1992. I think what the Premier League and, most importantly, the Premier League clubs have created is a competition that, captivates people wherever they are watching from and whatever they are watching. We are incredibly fortunate to have so many great football clubs. We have wonderful players, as you said, from all over the world who are coming to play, and that's always been the case, and that's been part of it too. But we have these wonderful players, these wonderful clubs in front of packed houses, and it helps it pop off the screen and draw people in and allow them to come to understand and enjoy this sort of really complex set of narratives and stories that the Premier League produces season on season.
बस यही बोलना है, यही तुम्हारा ऐड?
Yeah, that's it.
सही है यार. Now delivering in 10 minutes.
How does the Premier League make its revenues? To the naysayers, what are the different avenues through which the Premier League can monetize itself?
At the Premier League itself, we are responsible for the media collective, and my colleague Paul Molnar is responsible for that, which is selling the media rights across all 380 games each season on a territory by territory or region by region basis. We also sell commercial partnerships with a select number of brand partners who we think can add value, not only economically, of course, but also strategically. That's especially the case when you start to look into international markets, where we increasingly are working with brands who are activating on a multi-territory or, again, regional basis. That's almost the bedrock of the revenue that we can help provide for the clubs. From that platform, the clubs are then able to do a large number of things that tend to fall into three buckets. The sort of the match day, the retail, and then the sort of hospitality element to supplement the media rights that we're able to deliver.
Right. And has there ever been a point that we need to come up with more and more avenues and can never let it be stagnant at this point?
I think that inevitably clubs and the Premier League is always looking for growth. But the way that I think about it is, more than anything, one should be consumer or market orientated. I think there's a lot of discussion in sport around monetizing the fan, and that can feel like the wrong language. Instead, I think the way we see it is satisfying the demands of the fan, which may ultimately deliver commercial upside. But if you start that way round, you're likely to end up in the right place, and you create something that is genuinely valuable to to you, as a club, as an individual shareholder, but also to the fans who are the most critical part of your ecosystem.
Let's talk about the Premier League as a brand. It's growing exponentially, and we've seen such a big rise of the brand of the Premier League. Are there key innovations that you'd like to highlight that have caused the biggest of impacts?
We were with Barclays for a long time, and as I said, and before that with other title partners. And as I said, I was arriving at the tail end of that journey. And that was it wasn't my decision. I wasn't at the league at the time, but that was clearly a difficult decision for lots of reasons. I think inevitably, when you move away from a title partnership model, you not only create the opportunity to speak for yourself, to be, if you like, your own brand, but also to a great extent, the obligation. And I think since 2016, when we made that move, one of the things that we've been learning is that we want to satisfy that obligation and lean into it. Areas such as, social causes that we might care about, areas that we have enjoyed having the chance to use our voice within, whether that be around, racism or mental health or homophobia or other sort of social issues. We have been able to talk openly about our views as a organization, but also as a collective on behalf of the clubs. And I think that has been powerful and has been sort of meaningful. The other thing that has happened is that just by creating a set of brand values, a look and feel, IP, you deliver a kit of parts that maybe makes it more easier for your partners to activate, more easier for your partners to tell the stories that they want to tell. And so you're creating tools that they want and value, and by definition that then helps amplify your brand further.
Right. And amplify it is being done to a large extent. We see kids becoming fans of the Premier League to a large extent, and we constantly see the brand becoming bigger and bigger.
बस यही बोलना है, यही तुम्हारा ऐड?
Yeah, that's it.
सही है यार. Now delivering in 10 minutes.
If we are to talk about how you cater to different markets, the Premier League is a global brand in its truest sense, but how do you focus on different markets? In India, let's say there are the biggest football fans that one may find. How do you go about focusing on each market?
We try and listen as much as we can. We are, in the end, I guess, in some ways, not similar to RCB or the IPL. We're a local competition that happens to have a global reach, and that's very flattering and very exciting. But our matches aren't played in outside of the UK, so we have to listen. And we work with a number of research agencies. We run particularly regular analysis in 36 countries, of which India is one and has been one for a long time. And we also pick up sort of a lot of qualitative data from focus group work. And of course, we listen to our partners and our commercial partners and what they're telling us about what they are seeing on the ground. So we can pick up a lot of insight that way. And then the question, I suppose, is what one does with it and how one tailors, to your point, your strategies to suit particular markets. If we take India as an example, we have always seen our role to some extent as growing football's engagement with communities in this territory. So going back to 2007, we began our Premier Skills coaches program, which has ultimately reached over 120,000 people now. We've just just started in Goa and Delhi, Primary Stars Trial, which is our sort of flagship school program in the UK. We've done a series of fan activations with Star Sports, our long-term broadcast partner. We, at those moments when the opportunity has been created, have looked to activate the sort of fan interest. And then on top of that, we've been in a mutual cooperation agreement with the ISL. And as part of that relationship, have helped to deliver the Next Gen tournament, which is it's a project we're quite passionate about because we think it helps, to a very small extent, I think, helps to give India or the Indian footballing community something of genuine value, which is having the youth teams playing against equivalent youth teams from the Premier League, and that's good for everybody. But we think it's been a sort of meaningful contribution that we can make to in that case, the professional ecosystem in this country, notwithstanding our work in the communities.
Well, it's great to see the acknowledgement, and clearly there's a huge habit that's set in, right? Daytime is for cricket, nighttime is for football here in India, and everyone follows the game to the greatest extent possible, and then some, if you can call it that. Let's talk about drawing parallels. You, of course, are familiar with the IPL. The IPL has been around, started in 2008, completes its 16 years, 17 years running. Do you draw parallels to the IPL in certain ways, and how do you see the two leagues going about?
They're very different ecosystems, I think. Cricket and football as sports have some material points of difference. But of course, both as a cricket fan and as a professional in the sports industry, you have to look at IPL and the success that it has created, and try to understand how it has gone about creating that success. It's a phenomenal competition, but it raises so many interesting points that are relevant to all sports around things like format and core appeal and listening to your consumers and your audiences. And one of the things that I was saying on stage a short while ago is how innovative it seems to have been as a competition. And that's from the cheap seats. But you see things like impact substitutes, the draft system originally, the expansion now into the women's IPL. And I'm sure that there's lots of ideas that, maybe people closer to it maybe there were some other ideas that were left on the cutting room floor. Maybe there's some ideas that people regret trying to implement. But from the outside looking in, you look at the IPL as a real hub of sporting innovation. And that is really admirable, and I think thought-provoking for anybody who's working in the sport industry.
बस यही बोलना है, यही तुम्हारा ऐड?
Yeah, that's it.
सही है यार. Now delivering in 10 minutes.
You did mention about different ideas being in the drawing board and what actually gets implemented. If you were CCO of the Indian Premier League, what would be on the implementation list as such?
I am definitely not going to feel like I'm in a position to give them advice. I suppose, almost mirroring your question earlier, maybe the thing that matters most for any business or for any brand is to know what you stand for, to have a really deep sense of that, and then make sure that you stay true to that DNA. And my guess would be, again, from the cheapest of seats, that part of the IPL's DNA is about innovation and ingenuity. And if that is the case, then the challenge is, how do you, as it becomes a greater and greater global success, where traditionally it's harder to innovate once you reach scale, generally, how do you make sure that you're able to carry on doing that in a way that is faithful to the origins of the competition whilst continuing to build this fantastic sort of global carnival?
Right. While the Premier League, being a global brand, has reached the nook and crannies of India, the Indian Super League, the ISL, is doing its fair bit and has a huge potential as per a lot of market industry experts. What's your say about the potential that you see with the ISL, and how do you see it going about?
So we literally big fans of the ISL. We agreed a mutual cooperation agreement in 2014, I think. We've renewed it since. As I mentioned, we work with them on things like the Next Gen Cup. We see the data that shows ever-growing support for the ISL in this country, which I think is fantastic for the growth of the game. And generally speaking, what's good for the game is good for the Premier League as well as the local competition. And I think as well, you see the sort of, again, to your point, if you're making sure the fans are coming on the journey with you, then commercial success is very likely to follow. And for the ISL, that seems to be the case. And in an incredibly knowledgeable sports environment like India, whilst it isn't cricket, football can can get closer to that level. And I think as that happens and it becomes more of an endemic game, the ISL is going to benefit, and we would see that as a wholly good thing.
How do you see the Indian market go about things in the next 5 years? The Indian sports industry as such, if you were to draw a 5-year blueprint, what would that look like?
I think you're going, inevitably, one is aware of the macro trends affecting India. Relatively young, relatively affluent, growing economy, increasingly sort of taking great strides as a global superpower. And that is wholly positive for India, and is going to create all sorts of, benefits for the consumer environment, the entertainment industry. My guess would be everyone will want a piece of that. And the question is to what extent India does or doesn't want to welcome those people in. And if you're, the Premier League or anybody else, you have to think about it in those terms. And that's why we have cared for a long time about putting relationships in at grassroots or community level, working with trusted partners, the British Council, India on track, the ISL, as we've already talked about, so that we have at least some history of showing that we want to be a participant in a territory, as opposed to dipping in and out from time to time, which would be different.
What are some of the biggest challenges with international football from your level, and how you go about things?
Football has probably benefited from every social trend over the last 30 or 40 years. And that is driving ever greater global interest in the game. And that is fantastic. But it also means there's a whole number of moving parts that one has to stay across. Recently, clearly, there's the rise of the Saudi Pro League. A few years ago, there was a very high level of investment in China, seeing MLS in a sort of post-Messi environment, thinking more and more about soccer, or the United States thinking more and more about soccer. And it feels very much like a sort of global ecosystem. Now, again, that's a great thing for football, but making sure that you understand what that means for you as an individual competition is quite important. And we spend quite a bit of time thinking about that, and thinking about how in this sort of changing world, we can best support, the clubs who own the Premier League, and need to feel as if we're driving them or creating the right opportunities to drive them forward.
Talk to me about your experience here at the Leaders event. What was that like? And what are some of the biggest takeaways yet?
I think whenever you come to any event, but maybe especially in a country like India, and maybe in a city like Bangalore, you soak up a lot by osmosis. You have conversations like this. You have snatched conversations. You hear about how an individual fan or a group of friends enjoy the Premier League. You get so much by just being on the ground, even as I am, for a relatively brief period. What is also noticeable is how many interesting, innovative, insightful people have gathered at this conference. And I've started having some of those conversations even in the last few hours, but I'm looking forward to the next couple of days and hearing a lot more, and therefore learning a lot more before I sleep a bit on the way home.
Well, we certainly had a lot of takeaways from this conversation. Really appreciate your time and look forward for plenty more. Enjoy your time here at the Leaders India Summit. Thanks once again for being here on the RCB podcast. Well, pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Big Basket Now presents the RCB podcast.